So, building on Benjamin's point that we want to have sort of one global model for this, but we still need some flexibility. And so what we've done is we've asked experts from 3 key sectors that have been leading the way on S-BOM adoption to talk a little bit about the work they're doing and how they're taking sort of this shared idea and making sure it meets the needs of their community, of their companies, of their customers. So we're going to start off with a recorded message from Jonathan Meadows from Citi, who's been a great champion of transparency in the financial sector. So he's we've started off with our friends in the UK and Europe. So we have a video from Jonathan, we hope.
And in fact, I was Citi responsible for supply chain engineering. I also chair the emphasizing supply chain working group and the OSSF end user work. Challenges that are being worked on and how we're looking to leverage this technology in the future. Now, it's clear as an industry, we're at the beginning of the process of leveraging S-BOMs, and we do look to learn lessons from colleagues in both the health and pharmaceutical sectors. But whilst it's still early days, we are seeing progress in terms of the general awareness of financial institutions that software supply chain security is a key emerging threat. Whereas in prior years, there were just a few institutions discussing this threat, we now have a growing number starting to focus heavily in this area. It's often difficult for teams coming into this field to gain an understanding of where to focus, as this is such a broad problem space and there's so much innovation. But work has been ongoing to showcase the basic threats and initial mitigations enterprises and financial institutions can take. In general, financial institutions are taking a risk-based approach to securing their supply chains holistically, starting to further analyze their supply chain and develop threat models to gain a better understanding of key threats, such as the ingestion of open source software into the development pipelines, prohibiting malicious open source software from reaching the institution, and obviously the ingestion of vendor software, leveraging S-BOMs and VEX documents. S-BOMs form a key part in addressing these supply chain threats, but it's fair to say that the financial industry as a whole is still at that early stage in case of adoption. Several teams are building proof of concept systems to ingest and evaluate S-BOMs, focusing on inventory and vulnerability management use cases. And this is a key improvement from prior years, where there was a push to request S-BOMs, but institutions lacked capabilities to leverage them. We're now seeing institutions emerge with that capability. Work continues to share guidance on how to build such systems, with teams contributing that knowledge and code back to the open source community. From a Citi perspective, this has led us to engage directly with the open source community and contribute to multiple open source projects. Now, as teams are beginning to build S-BOM ingestion and evaluation systems, focus is now turning to defining what details are expected from a vendor to demonstrate a secure software supply chain, in addition to defining a profile for the minimum fields required for a vendor of a regulated entity. Initial conversations are also occurring around VEX and its implications. Work is underway to discuss how to define exploitability and the associated risk tolerance of accepting a VEX document, and also what level of status justification would make a difference to the institution. Would they trust an inline mitigation already exists, or only a component not present status? One key area that S-BOMs are starting to be used within financial institutions is to handle S-BOMs created from internally built software, tracking the open source dependencies used within those applications. Teams are generating S-BOMs for software built internally and then using that data to support vulnerability management. And by initially building these systems, focusing on internal pipelines, teams are able to stipulate where in the SDLC the S-BOM is generated. In addition, they can specify the tools used to control the quality of that S-BOM. Now, clearly, that's a relatively simple extension of existing vulnerability management and scanning practices. But by leveraging S-BOMs, there's an easier insight gained into the location of vulnerable software within the estate. And it provides an on-ramp for S-BOM usage when S-BOMs mature externally. So as institutions are starting to leverage S-BOMs for internal use, they're creating that capabilities to use S-BOMs as part of the inventory and vulnerability management programs, effectively starting to secure and inventory their internal supply chains. The next logical step is to leverage these capabilities with external vendors to truly gain a better understanding of the supply chain. And this is clearly the real goal the sector is looking to advance into. The industry is certainly looking to increase its focus on gaining deeper insights into vendor supply chains and their vendor security posture. And as part of that work, working groups within the financial community have approached vendors to request S-BOMs for analysis. However, this has been slow to progress, as many vendors thus far have been unable to provide S-BOMs for a number of different reasons. As institutions are now building systems capable of leveraging S-BOMs, there's now growing pressure to obtain S-BOMs from vendors and obtain more granular data regarding transparency of the supply chain and development process within a vendor organization. But early indications based upon the data received suggest two issues that the groups still need to work on, specifically S-BOM quality and the S-BOM naming problem. The first problem encountered so far has been the quality of the S-BOMs obtained. And I know this is a known problem that many are working on. However, the quality of the data provided has been variable, unfortunately to the extent that in some cases the data has not been usable. As one of the industry's main use cases is to identify which open source libraries contain vulnerabilities and where they've been deployed. To aid vulnerability management, we need the ability to correctly identify the libraries and match associated vulnerabilities. However, the initial data shows that there's no common approach between S-BOMs to standardize on depth and breadth of the data provided, with some S-BOMs containing only direct dependencies and others showing dependencies at varying depths, meaning that whilst beneficial, we still have some way to go before as an industry we can truly leverage the S-BOM for vulnerability management within vendor components. But there's a strong appetite to continue working with others in this field and space to find approaches to solve that problem, potentially working to define a quality benchmark. And that's something that sector participants are working on. Another challenge that is preventing wider adoption is the naming of components within the S-BOM. Essentially, the name used to identify components within the S-BOM isn't canonical, leading to difficulty in identifying which library the S-BOM is referring to. In some cases, names are used that are vendor-specific, or libraries have been forked, preventing an accurate match for the library in the vulnerability database. This results in the S-BOM only partially matching component libraries and thus resulting in a gap in the inventory systems, prohibiting identification of libraries in a vulnerability management scenario. And we continue working with others to work through that solution. Certainly more work required here, but multiple finance groups are actively engaged in finding a solution. So in summary, whilst the usage of S-BOMs in the financial industry is still in its infancy, we're now starting to see institutions develop S-BOM ingestion and evaluation capabilities. They're being leveraged initially for software developed internally to prove out approaches as we work to iron out quality and naming challenges. And I'd like to leave with one final point, that we see CISA as the driving force behind these fundamental changes in the industry. And I'd like to thank Alan and team for the continued industry contribution, for setting up the CISA working groups, and for hosting this great event. With that, I'll hand it back to Alan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Pointing him up there. No, that's fantastic, and right, we need to hear the what we don't have as well as what we do have to figure out what our future is, and we're gonna have plenty of time to talk about that later today. I'll also tease that CISA this summer is going to be having a white paper out for comment on exactly this challenge of software identity and what the paths forward are.